Good evening and welcome to the Week in Review. I'm Amanda Vinicky. Paris Schutz has the evening off. We'll be joined by our Week in Review guests in just a moment, but first, some of today's top stories. Illinois is out with new COVID guidelines for schools that drop quarantine and physical distancing rules. This aligns with updated and looser best practices recommended by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The CDC's changes de-emphasize social distancing and no longer recommend testing of those in community settings like schools who have no symptoms. The new guidelines also no longer call for unvaccinated individuals to quarantine after a known exposure to COVID. Instead, anyone exposed should wear a mask, then get tested 5 days later. This as Cook County dropped from high to medium risk of COVID transmission. All but 12 of Illinois' 102 counties are at a medium or high transmission risk of COVID. DuPage, DeKalb, and Lake counties are among the roughly half of Illinois counties at the high level. Hospitalizations are up statewide at nearly 1,500. That's the highest since mid-February. Illinois has a fresh roadmap of $34 billion of new road and other projects. The director of the Illinois Department of Transportation says construction costs are up at least 10%, but he says Illinois has shovel-ready projects that will allow the state to leverage money available thanks to last year's major federal infrastructure law.
This multi-year program does not just focus on roads and bridges, but shows how we plan to invest in transit, rail, airport, and waterways over the next 6 years, capturing the true multi-modal mission of the Illinois Department of Transportation.
Local highlights include improved access to O'Hare with reconstruction and more ramps from Bessie Coleman Drive to the Kennedy, bridge work on I-90-94, and work on Ida B. Wells Drive, including a new bridge deck at the old post office. Millions will also be spent to construct more lanes on the Illinois 56 corridor in DuPage, and $1 billion will go toward rebuilding aging structures along the freight corridor of I-80. A trio of marijuana enterprises received the state's latest licenses to open cannabis dispensaries. That brings the number of licenses awarded via Illinois' plagued social equity program to 182. Illinois issued the bulk of those licenses in July after a 2-year delay. 3 more licenses are still available, and the state says they should be issued in coming weeks. It could still, however, be a stretch before the new pot shops open. But when they do, the number of legal dispensaries in Illinois will more than double. And now to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are Heather Sharon of WTTW News, Greg Hines of Crane's Chicago Business, Aaron Hegarty of The Daily Line, and Jacoby Cochran of CityCast Chicago. Now let's get right to it. We now know what the FBI seized when on Monday agents searched former President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago home. Heather, what did they find?
Well, they took 11 sets of, they say, classified documents. Now, some of the documents were classified at the highest level, and some of the documents were just confidential. Now, we don't know specifically what those documents were, although the Washington Post did report that some of them were related to the nation's nuclear program. There was no confirmation of that in the documents that were released by a judge today. However, we do know that the documents included information about French President Emmanuel Macron, as well as Roger Stone, who was convicted of lying to Congress for his role in the Russia investigation back in several years ago. So this appears to have been a wide-ranging search, and we will certainly hear more about it in the days and weeks to come.
Greg, top secret documents, just classified documents, things relating to nuclear documents. How problematic is this? All at a home, by the way, that hosts events.
Oh, well, Amanda, not problematic at all. I mean, this is all, the FBI planted the information. Donald Trump said so. This is all a witch hunt. So you need to go on to some real news.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
It is being a little less facetious. It's potentially very serious. If you or I were found in possession of top secret documents, we would be in jail and they'd throw away the key. Now, whether that's going to happen to Mr. Trump, I don't know. He's staged a furious response. He's gotten the support of much of the Republican Party nationally, already Representative Congresswoman Margaret Taylor Greene is moving to impeach Merrick Garland for abusing his authority, for daring to go after this former president. But if I were Trump's lawyers, I'd be telling them to gear up for a fight and keep quiet. Neither of what he'll do.
Well, and Jacoby, in fact, we had Attorney General Merrick Garland have to come out and speak and say he personally approved this after the FBI under serious threat. And you have also President Trump trying to say that President Barack Obama did the same thing, and the National Archives immediately coming out and saying, no, that's not how that went down. But Jacoby, can you kind of just speak to what this does to a judicial system, to an FBI, and just Americans' trust in these franchises?
I mean, it's been one of the major tactics of the GOP, former President Donald Trump, is to attack institutions for illegitimacy. If you can sow discord in journalism, if you can sow discord up and down the judicial inside of Congress, then ultimately you have an American public that's constantly in disbelief, constantly wondering, when's the next conspiracy theory going to drop? And so I think he's very clearly playing the same game he's been playing for a decade, is if I could spread misinformation as much as possible, when it's time to hang me out to dry, I'll just play the same game, which is these are lies. This was planted. Let's impeach Merrick Garland and up and down the line. And so, these tactics don't shock me at all. It's crazy to think, though, that a person is out here fundraising on the facts that their home and business have been raided. It blows my mind.
Greg, why is the GOP sticking by Trump?
For the reason that primaries tend to draw, and that's where most elections in this country are determined now, not in the general election, but in primaries. They tend to draw the hardcore on both sides. They draw progressives disproportionately on the Democratic side. On the Republican side, they draw true believers. And Mr. Trump has indicated in this primary cycle, which is now just about done, we'll see what happens to Liz Cheney this upcoming Tuesday, I believe, but he's demonstrated that he still has considerable sway in a lot of these races. He hasn't won them all, but he's won enough to be able to stand up and say that if you want to survive, if you want to go on, if you want to have a political career, you've got to kiss the ring.
And we've seen that primary record that you speak of play out in Illinois previously, and also just this past week in Wisconsin. Now, Aaron, Donald Trump under criminal investigation for potential violations of the Espionage Act, also obstruction of justice. Could these be the changes that stick to this until now seemingly Teflon president?
No, that is something that I'm going to be watching. I mean, he's somehow survived impeachments, and I don't know, this is something obviously in my, 30 plus years of life, I've not watched as it's unfolding with having knowledge of what's going on. But yeah, I think to put a guess out right now would be hard to do. I'm just going to keep.
It's all so very unprecedented, right? Let's take things now closer to home. And Aaron, back to you. In fact, actually to our actual homes, given that Mayor Lori Lightfoot this week introduced her 2023 budget, and it includes a property tax increase. But Aaron, not as big of one as it could have been. Explain.
Yes. So, yes, this past week, the mayor had her budget forecast address, which kind of sets the stage for how budget negotiations are going to go this coming fall. And she announced that there's a $127.9 million budget gap to fill this year, which is smaller than what had been predicted earlier this year, and even smaller than what has been the gap in the previous 2 years, when last year they closed a $733 million gap, and the year before $1.2 billion. So the mayor is calling this, the city's stability budget, but at the same time, she is proposing a $42.7 million property tax increase. This is lower than, what it potentially could have been with her measure that ties property tax increases annually to CPI or 5%. And she said, this increase would be merely, $34 next year for a house valued at $250,000, which she compared to the cost of 4 Italian beefs from Al's beef for a family of four.
For Italian beefs, but for Italian beefs with cheese, I believe that is. And Heather, I know that is not your thing, although I will say that I recently was at Al's and they offer, I believe, actually 2 kinds of cheese toppings on a beef if you want to get one. Heather, do you find any sort of irony in this? Tying property tax increases to inflation was ostensibly something that would help remove politics from these sort of decisions, and instead, is this a decision that is political, or is it just practical?
Well, this was a gamble that the mayor took 2 years ago. You forget that, like, inflation had been hovering between 2 and 3% for really as long as most people could remember. So it seemed like it was an easy way to tie the city's property tax levy to the cost of inflation and give older people a chance to avoid tough votes, especially in election years. And if the budget is crafted to assume that the property tax is going to rise with inflation, then nobody really has to talk about it. Maybe we in the media won't notice it, and it will just sort of slip on through. Of course, that blew up in the mayor's face when inflation soared to nearly 9%. Now, her budget had called for a maximum increase of 5% to the property tax levy. And as Aaron said, she is now proposing only a 2.5% increase to get to that $42.7 million. So that all will be up to the city council to decide if that's appropriate. And we heard from Alderman Pat Dowell after the mayor's speech that it's going to be a hard sell because this budget deficit is truly infinitesimal when you compare it to the size of the entire city budget. And there will certainly be older people looking in the couch cushions, shaking out the change jar, trying to find another way to cover this gap so they can go to voters in February and say, see, look, I didn't raise your property taxes. So it's going to be a big fight.
And we've been talking about what folks have had to say about the budget. Let's hear from the mayor herself.
If 2021 was our pandemic budget and 2022 was our recovery budget, this must be our stability budget.
So, Greg, is Chicago on stable fiscal footing?
Well, the honest truth is we don't know. What we do know is that the mayor's running for re-election, and that having guaranteed ourselves a property tax, now she's trying to have her cake and eat it too by saying, oh, it's not going to be as big as it could have been, so we're ahead. Frankly, it's going to be, it looks like the city is in somewhat better shape than it was. State governments in Illinois is in good shape. Governments all over the country have had, because we've had a very peppy economy, have had record revenue coming in. That helps them all. They all, on top of that, they've had all this federal COVID relief money known as ARPA. We won't fully know until not this upcoming year, but year after, when the ARPA money is gone and the mayor has to face a decision about all these social welfare programs and health programs that she implemented, social equity programs that cost money. How's she going to pay for it if there's no federal money? But that's then. Right now, it's re-election time, and golly gee, your property tax isn't going to be nearly as bad as it could have been.
Yay! So speaking of, Aaron, politics, the mayor now has more competition. Who is that in this race for mayor?
Yeah, so this week we saw Alderwoman Sophia King of the 4th Ward officially announce that she's going to challenge Lightfoot next year. There had been, plenty of speculation that King was going to jump in, and she made it official with a very polished video announcing her candidacy this week. And yeah, I think it'll be interesting because King is now the 3rd sitting alderman to announce a run next year. And I think it'll make budget season even more interesting with probably grandstanding speeches and proposals.
Interesting, I'll sub that word for contentious, perhaps.
Yes,
what I'll sub in there. Heather, we also learned this week that one of the mayor's more vocal critics will not, however, be entering that fray.
That's right. Chicago Police Union President John Catanzara will not run for mayor in 2023, although he promised to do so after the mayor and he clashed over the city's vaccine requirement for cops. This week, we also had Jesus Chuy Garcia crack open the door just a little bit to a run for mayor. Of course, he ran in 2015 and gave former Rahm Emanuel quite a scare, forcing the first runoff in modern Chicago history. So if he runs, that would really reshuffle all of the decks. But Aaron's correct. Sophia King could give Lori Lightfoot a run for her money. She's a progressive, and she's got a record of progressive accomplishments that she's going to talk about in this campaign.
And Greg, briefly, I know you reported on this. Do you think that Congressman Garcia is going to want to be Mayor Garcia instead?
You know, probably not, but sometimes these things pick up a life of their own. Chewy, you know, when people come in and say, do it, eventually you weaken. He could be playing the old Harold Washington game. Okay, you want me to run? Show me your money. Raise me $1 million. And,
there we go. Then he can dole it out perhaps to other candidates, and that helps him raise his profile even more.
I don't think so, but I wouldn't bet the farm on it.
All right. No, Jacoby, Alderwoman King says that she is not going to be bullied out of this race. This is apparently a response to the City Council's Black Caucus chair saying that with 7 Black candidates, quote, we run the risk of losing it all. What is your take on that?
I mean, we hear that during every election season, that the more candidates, Black or brown, get into the fray, that there's a likelihood that we could split the Black or brown vote. Something you almost never hear when you're talking about white candidates running for mayor. And so I understand Sophia King's desire to label it as not being bullied in this case, because you do see it constantly be thrown out. However, it's also realistic, right? Between businessman Willie Wilson, between Roger Sawyer, between the incumbent mayor, Sophia King does have an uphill battle. And I wonder if those big endorsements that came through when she was running for alderperson, we're talking former President Barack Obama, Tony Preckwinkle, who obviously lost to the mayor in the last election, if they come through and give her that name recognition that all alder people are looking to gain, I think this could maybe change the race. I don't think anybody right now outside of the incumbent is looking very strong.
And Heather, we can't talk about the mayor's race without talking about the issue of crime, including on the CTA. So, Heather, what is the new plan for keeping the L safe, and does it, as this initiative is dubbed, meet the moment?
Well, CTA President Dorval Carter spoke to the City Club of Chicago this week and said that they would do a better job of telling people when buses and trains would arrive. We've all experienced the ghost train and the ghost bus, you know, where it looks like it's coming and then it just never shows up. And that's very frustrating and potentially dangerous if people are waiting in one spot for a long period of time. So he said they were going to redo their schedules to make them more accurate, and they want to expand the number of security guards and other sort of law enforcement agents on the trains and the buses. But this is really a simple issue that is very difficult to solve. Ridership is still far below pre-pandemic level, and the fewer people you have the more chances of somebody being isolated and a bad actor sort of taking advantage of that. So everybody has sort of said that the real solution is getting ridership back to those levels, but it's nearly impossible to do if people don't feel safe, and that is the unvirtuous circle that the CTA is caught in right now.
Meanwhile, Jacoby, there is tension at the Chicago Police Department after Superintendent David Brown fired the man who had been in charge of implementing the consent decree, that is Robert Boyk. So, Jacoby, why did the superintendent do that, and does this spell trouble for trust in the police department?
I mean, without a doubt. I said this earlier on Reset. I don't think that CPD takes the consent decree that seriously over the last 3 years, and my evidence for that is missed deadlines. And now when you add this, firing a person who, from everything I read from the email, was trying to get the superintendent to understand that by taking officers out of training, that you're going to set back another deadline, which will continue to harm trust efforts. And so what you see here is, I think David Greising from BGA said it perfectly. It's like this move feels like Superintendent Brown doesn't see the field here. You know, firing somebody who's in charge of meeting deadlines at a time in which it seems like CPD was actually starting to make some dent in those deadlines, I mean, it's not a good look. And if it's only because you didn't like the criticism that was provided, because you want to take officers out of training to meet other priorities, that seems like a really, I don't want to say unfortunate, but it seems like a really foolish move when your leadership is being questioned every single day.
The mayor still sticking by Superintendent Brown, and also today giving a shout out to State's Attorney Kim Foxx, who says that the exodus of unhappy prosecutors is not about her leadership. Let's take a look.
The reality is that we are in the midst of what has been designated as the Great Resignation, and we have not been spared.
So, Heather, she is on the defense over this. Is she in political trouble?
Well, she is not up for re-election for a whole nother cycle. She just won re-election. So this is not a crisis that will toss her out of office in November. And I think some people get confused about when people are up for re-election and when people are not. But I did think the mayor's statement of praise for Kim Foxx was interesting today because, you know, if she's looking for votes in the Black community, Kim Foxx has a lot of supporters in that community because she ran on a criminal justice reform platform, and she has really worked incredibly hard to deliver that reform. Those remarks were made at a press conference where she announced that she was overturning 8 convictions obtained by a Chicago police detective who's been shown to have lied and framed suspects. And that is what Kim Foxx is really going to focus on when and if she runs for a 3rd term in office.
It may have been the United States' largest mass exoneration for murder. Greg, now, meanwhile, take us downtown to July of 2023 when NASCAR races will be taking over city streets. What did you learn about this, and is it a good thing for the city?
Well, what we've learned, and we've learned with difficulty because the mayor and her people really don't want to give details. We had to FOIA this, is that the deal they've cut with the Park District allows NASCAR to use portions of Grant Park for as long as a month. The area around, in particular around Buckingham Fountain, where they're going to put big grandstands where they can sell tickets for people to watch the race. We've learned that the amount of compensation that the Park is going to get appears to be a small fraction of what Lollapalooza is paying, even though it's going to pull in as many people, 100,000 up to that, potentially more under the terms of the deal. And we've learned that this is just a 3-year deal, but there's 2 one-year options that are pretty much automatic. And we've learned that the mayor, who has promised to be open and transparent, still won't tell us what's the city getting, how long is Lakeshore Drive going to be closed, DuSable Drive, how long is Michigan Avenue going to be closed. And I don't understand this, frankly. There's an argument probably to be made that for tourism and hotel revenues and Chicago's reputation, that there's some potential here, but the mayor's not making it any easier by refusing to tell what's going on. There are tens of thousands of people who live right across the street from Grant Park. They're going to be affected. There's going to be big cars roaring through their front yard. They deserve to know what's going on. They deserve to have a voice.
You can't really help but notice a NASCAR driving through. They're loud. They're quick. Let's briefly, we just got a couple minutes left in the race for governor. There is no love lost between the nominees. Republican candidate for governor Darren Bailey doubling down on defending a video in which he compares abortion to the Holocaust, saying that he spoke with Jewish leaders who agree with him, but Governor J.B. Pritzker, who is Jewish, doubts that and is demanding an apology. Here he is.
Why can't Republicans just stand up and say what Darren Bailey said was wrong? Why can't they do that? And why can't Darren Bailey just apologize? He has now twisted himself into knots, first trying to explain what he said, then going back and say, oh, no, I really meant what I said.
Jacoby, will Governor Pritzker get that apology, and does it matter to voters?
It doesn't matter to voters, and he's probably not going to get it. This is a man who called our city a hellhole and put out flamethrowers in an advertisement, someone who's outwardly spoken about dragging our state backwards economically, withholding women's rights and healthcare autonomy, downright violent rhetoric towards the transgender community. Darren Bailey has gone all in on, as Greg said earlier, kissing the ring of Donald Trump and the most staunchly conservative in the party. And what that means right now in the GOP is seemingly being the most vitriol, saying the most outlandish things, ruffling the most amount of feathers. And it seems like he's going to ride that plan all the way through November. when I imagine it's not going to pay off for them.
And Aaron, I'm going to bet on you for our last 30 seconds. I know we've talked about the mayor running for re-election, wants that feather in a cap of a Chicago casino. What development did we have quickly?
So we have Bally's, which was, awarded the right to build a casino. They applied for, or they submitted their casino application this week. I think it was on Wednesday. They're hoping to get their temporary casino up and running, I think in June of next year, which seems very quick in the Medina Temple. And, they're hoping for the full casino, I think maybe by 2026.
Hoping to win there.
We'll
now
see.
it is in the hands of the State Gaming Board, at least partially. So with that, we are out of time. So our thanks to Heather Cerrone, Greg Hines, Aaron Haggerty, and Jacoby Cochran. Thanks. And that is our show for this Friday night. Now for the Week in Review, I'm Amanda Vinicky. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great weekend.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal